Thank you, Phil. Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Lee. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here tonight. As we progress, I may be a little more excited than you are, but we'll see how the time evolves. Phil gave me some room tonight. I'd asked kind of what this meeting, what the format had been, and he really gave me some latitude to talk about, within the context, hopefully, of Alcoholics Anonymous, any topics or focus on any particular area that was of interest to me or that perhaps I was navigating through. And so I have never talked about this topic in this particular way. So it may be 10 minutes, it may be 20 minutes, or we may get to the 45, 50-minute hour. But I ask in advance for your patience and tolerance with me, and it will appreciate that. But a few years ago, I walked into a meeting, and I was in the meeting. It started. The meeting had been going on for about 10 minutes. A guy walked in late to the meeting, and that's not surprising. Sometimes I'm that guy. He came in late. He sat down. One person shared, and then he decided to share. And sometimes I've been that guy, come in late, share right away. He said, when he started to share, that I don't know what the topic is, but we don't let that stop us, right? Because we can, he said, I don't know what the topic is, but from what I heard, I assume it's relationships. And it wasn't. But what struck me as I sat there was, in fact, all of our meetings are about relationship. All of our meetings are about my relationship to alcohol, my relationship to you, my relationship to me, and my relationship to God. And so I thought tonight what I would try to do a little bit is talk about those relationships, and hopefully in the context of what my relationships were like in those areas, what happened and what they are like today, what that relationship with alcohol was and is, what that relationship with you was and is, what that relationship with myself was and is, and what that relationship with God is about. Our book says that each of us, in our own language and from our own point of view, talks about how he established a relationship with God. And at the end of the day, that's really what we do. In the scope of everything that we talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous, it is ultimately about those 12 steps are the pathway to that power. The book is not the power. The steps are not the power. The intellectual discourse that we have, like this evening, is not the power. Those are the things that lay out the course of action that I take, that remove those things that block me off, that change my relationship to that power. And so I thought that that's the road I would try to go down. And as I said, that I might not have but about 10 minutes of stuff to talk about, and then you can talk amongst yourselves if we get there. But I got to Alcoholics Anonymous on actually, my last drink or drug was June the 29th of 1989. And I did not expect to go from that night till this between drinks. I was not stopping drinking. I had a relationship with alcohol. I in many ways used alcohol to manage my relationships with me and with you, to help manage those feelings that I had that I could not describe or articulate or fully communicate to anybody else. There's a wonderful line, at least for me, back in A Vision for You, describing Dr. Bob. and it says that that he was painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, for he did not yet fully understand what it meant to be alcoholic. And I can tell you, before getting to Alcoholics Anonymous and for some time after getting to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, at least feeling abnormal. As some of us were on before the meeting started, and joking lightheartedly, someone asked me how I'm doing, and I said, I usually don't tell you how I'm doing, I tell you how I'm feeling. And see, what I did forever was I couldn't even articulate how I was feeling, but I was just quite certain that I felt different than I thought you felt, that I was experiencing life differently than I thought you were experiencing life. And I couldn't label it, I couldn't talk about it. And I will tell you that is a very lonely place to be. Because when you feel separate from, and that's what Chuck Chamberlain said, our singular problem is this conscious separation from man and God. That I consciously, my ego tells me I'm separate from you and I'm separate from God. So that relationship between you and me and God is all separate. And I know that I'm at the party, but I feel like I wasn't invited. I'm at the party, but I'm an outlier on the outside. And I don't mean socially. Socially, I was very much in the middle of what was going on, trying not to be discovered, feeling the way that I felt. And when I drank, it managed that feeling. When I drank, it changed my relationship. You know, there's back in A Vision for You. It talks about on the first page of that chapter what most normal folks get from a few drinks. So my relationship with alcohol when I first started drinking was very much like the description in that first paragraph. It says that that there's conviviality, joyous intimacy with friends, release from care, boredom, and worry, colorful imagination, and a feeling that life is good. See, a feeling that life is good. It's an illusion. It is brought on by the alcohol. Life isn't good, but for a brief while, I get a feeling that life is good. And if you felt like I felt, who wouldn't want that is a change in how I see and experience and feel life. It changed my relationship to me and to you when I drank. Initially, I felt closer to you. I felt more connected. I wasn't, but I felt that way. You know, when you go into that room and you go either to the social event, or you go to the bar, or you go wherever you're going, and feel that sense of anxiety and self-consciousness. And again, though, try not to get caught feeling that way. Have a drink, have another drink, whatever it is, and all of a sudden, hey, these are my pals. All of a sudden, I am at ease. I get that sense of ease and comfort that accompanies a few drinks. So that's this initial relationship to alcohol I have. But I don't understand that I'm in the grips of a progressive and fatal illness that gets worse, never better. And pretty soon it turned on me. You know, there's the description, the best description for me of the progressiveness of that relationship to alcohol in our book is in Bill's story, right? And he talks about, you know, first when he's over there, you know, during World War II, and he's over there, and he's having some drinks, and that's working pretty well. He gets back. He starts in in school. And the first thing he talks about is that at one of his finals, he was too drunk to think or write. And Lois was troubled by that. Bill was not bothered by the fact that he was too drunk. If you're too drunk to think, that's pretty drunk. I've done a lot of thinking when I was drinking. It was bad thinking, but I did something. But too drunk to think or write. But then he goes on to say on the next page that drinking took an important and exhilarating role in his life. And man, I had that period. Then he goes on to say that now, a few paragraphs later, that he wasn't drinking every day, right? And when, a guy like me, I began to defend myself from the charges of alcoholism or that I was a problem drinker with stuff like, I don't drink every day at one point. And then Bill took up golf. Apparently, alcoholics should not play golf because apparently in Bill's story, he said golf allowed for drinking every day and every night. And I still hadn't figured out how golf allowed for drinking every night. But apparently Bill's powers of rationalization were immense, as are mine. And then it says, gradually things got worse. And ultimately, it said, I had been overwhelmed. Liquor was my master. Ultimately, he goes, as I went, from that feeling that life is good, from that joyous intimacy with friends, from that colorful imagination, from that release from the worries and cares of the day, to knowing that alcohol had become my master. That is now the relationship I had with alcohol. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, alcohol was my master. My relationship with alcohol was an abusive relationship. It was one of those relationships, I know as many people as we've got on here, 239 people, there are probably people on here who have been in an abusive relationship. So please don't think that I am minimizing that in any way. But what I would say is that when I'm watching that movie on TV, where there's someone that's in an abusive relationship and he or she leaves, and then a little later, they're going to go get back with the person. And I'm in my chair screaming, don't go back. Don't go back. Can't you see this is going to end badly? Don't you see? But with alcohol, that's the type of relationship I had. I would break up with alcohol. And then about a week later, I would get an alcohol booty call, right? I'd get that call from alcohol that say, Steve, man, just let me come over. Just let me come over, man. We'll just cuddle. We'll just hang out. And I'd end up having a couple of good dates with alcohol. Then it would beat the shit out of me again. And I would go through that process and I would remember the good times and try to focus on that and not the bad. And so I didn't know that I had entered that realm, that relationship with alcohol, where that even when I honestly wanted to, I couldn't stop entirely. That means to stop and never start again. Or when drinking, I had little control of the amount I took. It didn't mean every time I got terribly drunk, but it meant I was no longer predictable in how that was going to play out. So that's what that relationship to alcohol looked like. I end up in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not going to tell the whole drinking story. I then get sober. I'm introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm introduced to the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous that said I'm powerless over alcohol. My life had become unmanageable. And once I quit drinking, it seems like everything I'm doing in AA is about treating the unmanageability of my life. The second half of that first step, which is that relationship with me, the relationship with you, and the relationship with God. Because if I'm going to stay stopped, I'm going to have to go and, as our book says, get down to causes and conditions. I'm going to have to understand what the underlying factors are that contribute to those feelings that I have when I'm sober. And I don't think those are exclusive. Those feelings aren't exclusive to the alcoholic, but they're common to the alcoholic. All alcoholics seem to have some version of those feelings, but a lot of people have them that aren't alcoholic. In fact, unmanageability is part of the first step of over 200 other 12-step programs. But I don't understand where I'm headed, when I show up at AA. But as I put the drink aside, and I know that's an oversimplification of how I stopped drinking, but I want to just assume for the moment now, ask you to take the leap of faith that I'm physically sober at this point. And now what am I going to do? Now where am I headed in AA? And what happens is I become introduced to the fact that selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of my trouble. That self, my relationship with self is skewed. I have character, I have a defective character. I show up at AA apparently with a defective character. I know that it's a defective character because it produces character defects. And part of what I'm going to do during the process of my recovery, in the process of these 12 spiritual steps, is it begins to repair my character and change my relationship with me and change my relationship with you through my relationship with God. And these steps are designed to remove those things that block me off from the sunlight of the Spirit, from that power. It seems, and I've always, I will say that I showed up at Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't really atheist or agnostic as much as I was apathetic in the area of spiritual things. I had been uninvested in that, but I also I didn't believe, and I didn't know what I didn't believe, but I did not have a conscious contact with a power greater than myself. I'm a guy that believes that power is there whether I feel connected to it or not. That this, how I interpret and experience this power, which is God, is that it is ever present. And what happens through these 12 steps is I get rid of that bondage of self shrinks through the process of my recovery to allow me to have a conscious awareness of that power and to then begin to see how it works in my life. So, but I show up, right, and I begin to see in that third step, you turn me away from me trying to fix me. The third step is where I make a pivot from before. I'm trying to stop drinking. I'm trying to be a better man. I'm trying to be a better husband. I'm trying to be a better father. I'm trying to be a better worker. And all of those things are noble, and it doesn't mean I shouldn't give my best effort. But what you guys told me, Steve, you don't have the necessary power. You don't seem to be able to do that. I know it seems reasonable that you would attack your problems head on, that you would work on you. How often do we say that, right? I'm gonna spend a couple of days working on me. And but really what you introduced to me as the pivot in the third step is this is where I turn away from me and turn toward God. This is where I make the decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. And I do that by engaging in the rest of the 12 steps. I do that by beginning to take actions based on principle rather than on the way I feel or think. I begin to look for those principles as the guidelines for the actions I take, rather than my selfishness, my self-centeredness, my fear, those things that tend to dominate me. So my relationship with me is out of focus. I have a hypersensitivity. That's the nature of my problem. You know, my first fear inventory revealed a couple of things, but one of the things was that my biggest fear was what I think you think. My sponsor told me, Steve, here's a framing of a relationship with me. He said, Steve, you are not who you think you are. And you are not who they think you are. And you are especially not who you think they think you are. And see, I spend almost all my time worried about what I think you will think. How will this sound? How will this look? How will this be received? What will you think of me if I do this, say this, wear this, whatever it is? And that is a perverted relationship with myself. And so how do I get freer of that bondage of self? That's what that third step prayer says, right? One of the things in that prayer is I'm asking God to relieve me of the bondage of self. For years, I thought that self was being held hostage. That's the way I was interpreting that prayer. But today I interpret to mean, for me, that self is the hostage taker. My pride, my ego is ruling me. I am egocentric rather than God-centric. And everything I do in AA is through the process of the steps, trying to transition from this self-centeredness to a God-centeredness. And I'm never going to be all the way over at God-centered. I just want to be a little further on the dial than I've been. I want to keep trying to grow in that direction, as our book says. None of us are going to come anywhere near perfect adherence to these principles. So that requires another component of my relationship with me, which is humility. Not a humility that allows me to be as limited, as average, as flawed as I am right now, and be okay, have some peace of mind, not be done, not quit trying to grow along spiritual lines, not say, well, that's just the way I am and stay there forever. But one of the descriptions of humility in the 12 and 12, in the fifth step, is a clear understanding of who and what I am right now, coupled with a desire to be what I could be. So I can start from right now. All of us, any of us, are just where we are right now. And I want to continue to grow along spiritual lines, but I don't want to have to wait till I get there to be okay. I've spent most of my life getting ready to have a good day. As soon as something happens or something doesn't happen, as soon as I grow a little bit, as soon as I get more money, as soon as my daughter acts right, as soon as my wife appreciates a man, how lucky she is to have a man like me, whatever it is, however I feel slighted or afraid or out of focus or out of place, how can I be okay right now? And that is, that I think is a real description of humility that I can glob onto. There's another one, and I think it's in the sixth step in the 12 and 12, and it says that humility is a sincere desire to seek and do God's will. So it is always an act of humility when I am endeavoring to do what I think God would have me do. Now, I'm often wrong, but our book says, to the extent that I live as I believe he would have me live, can I match calamity with serenity? Can I find that peace of mind, even in the midst of things that may be going sideways? So that relationship with me, I was about 13, 14 years sober, and I went on a retreat, and Sandy B had started a retreat called the Far Corners Retreat. Now, I was at the first one, and during the break, and I went because I was in a tough spot. Even though I was sober 12, 13 years, I was not too happy with me. I was disappointed in some things I was doing and some things I was not doing, and I just I had a hypersensitivity around me, but I was just carrying the world pretty heavy. And I went to the retreat. Anyway, we ended up going on this walk on Saturday afternoon. And as we're on that walk, and I am laying this out to Sandy, and he just stopped me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Steve, you're already okay. and you're the one that doesn't know it. And see, I believe that is so true for all of us at some level. If we are trying to continue to grow, the fact that I stumble, the fact that I make a mistake, I've got enough humility to be as flawed as I am. And that's a lot of what I believe the 6th and 7th step revealed to me is I've gone through this inventory in 4 and I've shared it in 5, and I have more information about me than I've ever had. And I got to find a way to be okay with these very uncomfortable things that I learned about me. And okay doesn't mean I let myself off the hook. Okay just means, in the 11th step, it says that we don't fall into morbid reflection, for it would diminish our usefulness to others. So I'll just look, I'll use those things as one more reason for me to think about me, for me to crawl in a hole and think about me, which is not what you guys have encouraged me to do. We are saying that our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those about us. And the whole reason that I'm going through this exercise in AA is to be freer of that bondage of self, so I might be of some worldly good to you, rather than spend all my time thinking about me. And so that's this relationship with me. Well, what's my relationship with you guys when I showed up at AA? Again, it's very much like I said earlier, that I am disconnected. That's not the term I was using. I was 4 years sober, and Connie and I actually were going to some marriage counseling because we'd been married 11 years at the time. We'd been sober 4 years at the time. 7 of those years were drinking together. We'd been sober 4 years and we were struggling. And we're getting this marriage counseling, and we met with this woman individually and together a few times. And in one of my individual sessions, I'm prattling on just like I am talking to you guys here. And she just stopped me. And she said, "Steve, you must really be lonely." And boy, I will tell you, it was bone crushing for me to hear that, because I wouldn't have used that word a moment before she said it. But the moment she said it, I knew it was true. And I denied it. I pushed back because I couldn't let that be true. If I'm 4 years sober in AA, if I'm going to AA meetings and you guys are telling me how good I'm doing, and by the way, you're just so easy to impress that, just don't drink and go to a meeting and you're a winner, Steve. And I wasn't getting that good a press at home. But it was a matter of if this is true, I felt like that I'm a fraud in AA. And I went and talked to my sponsor, and he said, "No, Steve, that's not what it shows at all. It's just now it's time to put this in the game. This is proof that AA is working, and AA has brought you to this point. And now it's time for you to address this and put more and more in God's hands. Surrender in ways that I don't know I'm not surrendered." Lots of times we talk about, and people use the phrase, and I don't have any problem with it, the second surrender. For me, it feels like that my whole sobriety is a continuing surrender. It is an ongoing level of surrender that at levels I did not know I wasn't surrendered. Sometimes maybe we refer to that more as the peeling away of the onion, right? But there's always another layer for me to go, "Oh, that's in my way. Oh, that part of me is in my way." And I did not know it. So my relationship with you showed up in that discomfort, in that disconnectedness, in that loneliness. I was sober about 6 months, and I was loving being in AA, and I was loving going to meetings. And I just loved listening to you guys. I really did right away. I fell in love with coming to AA and listening to you guys. But I was coming and going home, showing up in time for the Serenity prayer and leaving after the Lord's Prayer. And I was sitting in a meeting. I got there by mistake a little early one day. And I heard people talking, that chatter before the meeting, almost like some of us had before the meeting here today. And I heard that chatter, and it dawned on me that some of these people are talking to each other between meetings. My God, I had no idea you guys were actually building relationships with each other. And I heard them talking about, being over at someone's house for Thanksgiving. This was in November. And at the end of this meeting, it was on a Saturday, somebody said, we're all going to lunch. Who wants to go? And man, I desperately wanted to go. Desperately. So I got in my car, I headed over to where they said they were going to lunch, but about halfway there, I turned off and went home. I just couldn't go. And the next week I did the same thing. And the third week I did the same thing. And I desperately wanted to be there, but my fear was, my self-centered fear, my hyper self-consciousness was, I was afraid to risk an awkward moment. I was afraid to risk being embarrassed. I was afraid that I would walk in that restaurant and there would already be 6 people sitting at a table for 6. And I wouldn't know whether to ask somebody to move over and make room for me. I wouldn't know if they even would really recognize me. I didn't know if they meant me. So I just couldn't go. And I say what I needed was 2 or 3 people to come up to me after the meeting and go, Steve, we've been talking, man. We really want you to go to lunch with us. And we're just arguing over who gets to sit with you. And at that point, I would have gone. See, you would have removed the obstacles. But my friend Lyle down in Georgia says the alcoholic would rather be dead than embarrassed. And I will tell you, I think that has held true for many, many people. And that day, I would risk anything rather than embarrassment, how I viewed embarrassment. That's that lack of humility. That's that misshapen relationship with myself and my misshapen relationship with you based on the fact that I had a limited, certainly, relationship with God. Because what I've discovered, at least for me, that I can't have a relationship with you unless I have a relationship with God. And I can't have a relationship with God unless I have a relationship with you. In fact, all of these, the one with me, the one with you, the one with God, is interconnected. The 12 and 12 says that we will see that we have been making unreasonable demands upon God, upon ourselves, and upon others. See, what I didn't realize is that's the relationship I had. In Bill's writing in Emotional Sobriety, he says that all a guy like me needs is perfect romance, top approval, and perfect security. All I need is, you know what I mean? That's all I need. And it says that's appropriate to the 17-year-old, but not the 47-year-old or the 57-year-old. So I didn't realize that my dependencies were on everything but God. My dependencies were on all my external problems. You know, what happens in AA is my problems get solved in ways I don't expect. In fact, I'm usually working on the wrong problem. And I'll share a story about that for me illustrates the point. And there was this businessman who was a top producer in his company, and liked by everyone, and did a great job. But every week when he went in to his CEO to give his weekly report, he would urinate on himself. And of course, he would be mortified and terribly embarrassed and humiliated by that. And after that happened a couple of times, the CEO, who was a kind and compassionate man, said, you know what, I'm going to set you up with the company psychiatrist to help you with that. And he said, thank you. So he goes away. He comes back the next week. He walks in to give his weekly report. And sure enough, he wets himself. And the CEO goes, oh man, I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to get in and see the psychiatrist. And he said, no, I got to see him. He says, well, I'm sorry that the psychiatrist couldn't help you. And he went, no, he helped me. He solved my problem. And the CEO goes, dude, you just pissed yourself. And he said, yeah, but I'm no longer embarrassed about it. And So see, what's the problem? My problems look external. I decide my problem is out here, but my problem is internal. And what I want is peace of mind, and I get confused about what's going to bring me that peace of mind. And I keep trying to get something or get rid of something, right? I keep trying to grow by acquisition when in the spiritual world, our growth is about getting rid of things. It is about subtraction. Less of me, as my friend Ralph says, less Steve, more God. Less demands on the world, less demands on you, less demands on God. Less Steve, more God. So what about this relationship with God then? Seems to be the key relationship that informs every other relationship I have. So if I've bumped all up into me in AA when I get here, right? I'm just tripping over me all the time. I've done inventory where I'm looking to see where self shows up in that inventory. Where is my selfishness? Where is self-righteousness? Where is self-pity? Where is self-reliance? Where are all these manifestations of self? Where am I tripping over me in my life that is hurting my relationships with you and my relationship with me? That's what that inventory says. Being convinced that self is what has defeated us, we look for its common manifestations. That's in the paragraph just before the book says resentment's the number one offender. What I'm doing when I go on that inventory then, and when I continue to inventory or have self-examination today, is to look for self in my relationships, in my fears, in my behavior. Where is self cropping up? And where is it impacting me? So this relationship with God. Well, I want to back up a second. So today, the relationship with you looks a little more like this. Now, this is the perfect ideal that our book identifies, right? When I land at the 10th step, it says, okay, hey, dude, now that you're here, it says you've entered the world of the spirit. So by the time I get to the 9th step, I've kind of stepped in I'm in the foyer of the world of the spirit, you know? I'm barely across the threshold, but I'm in there now. And I'm going to start taking a deeper look by steps 10, 11, and 12. I'm going to go all the way in the house. But right now, I'm just in that front door, and it says, so what am I to do now? What do I do now that I've worked these first 8 steps and I'm in the process of making these amends? It says, well, our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So that's what you're going to do next, Steve, is grow in understanding and effectiveness. And to do that, love and tolerance of others will be your code. The way you're now going to relate to others is through the lens of love and tolerance of others. And see, that love and tolerance is different than the tolerance doesn't mean that I just bite my lip and let you be a jerk and don't say anything. Love and tolerance is where I give you the freedom to be who you are. That tolerance is where I have the respect for us to be different and both be okay. My friend Jack W. from Carbondale, some of you folks may know, Jack's son offered him, his son's an engineer, and Jack was talking about tolerance one day. And his son said, Dad, that's not tolerance at all. He said, tolerance from an engineering standpoint is the space between two objects, allowing each to act freely and without friction. And I thought, man, that is perfect, right? What if I went through the world giving just enough space to each of you to act freely and without friction? And it doesn't mean that we want to be in abusive relationships and friendships and be mistreated, but it just 99% of the time, my frustrations with you are over little things that aren't my business, that just aren't my business. So I'm trying to give you a little more space for us to act freely and without friction. And so that becomes how I want to relate to my fellow man today. And this relationship with God, when I got to AA, I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't, I wasn't connected to God, just like I wasn't connected to you. I had been to church. I didn't have any bad experiences in church, and sometimes I found the stories interesting. Daniel in the lion's den, and Jonah in the whale, and Jack in the beanstalk, and because I didn't know the difference between the Bible story and a fairy tale. One didn't impact me any different than another. They're fascinating, but I just wasn't impacted. That's just me, right? So I had no reliance. But I also found myself uncomfortable when you guys began to talk about God, use that word, when you began to hold hands and say prayers at the end of the meeting. And for the first few months I was sober, I wouldn't hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer. And I want to thank the men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous who told me that was perfectly okay, that I absolutely have the right not to do that. Nobody shamed me, but I was invited in. And the guy said, Steve, why are you kind of stepping away from that circle? And I said, I don't want to be a hypocrite. And I was being as honest as I could be. And this guy had heard me talk about a bunch of stuff. He had heard me talk about infidelities in my marriage and 6 DUIs and a car wreck going the wrong way down the interstate and being drunk at the hospital when my daughter was born. But he said, but hypocrisy, that's where you draw the line, huh? He said, that's really impressive, man. He said, don't be a hypocrite. And he said, Steve, we got room for another hypocrite in Alcoholics Anonymous. So that allowed me just to start holding hands and saying a prayer. But over time, I found a relationship with God, that can work for me. I heard a story, and some of you who've heard me talk have heard me share this story because I share it a lot because it's been so impactful to me. But it was about the blind men and the elephant. And it says there were 3 men from Hindustan to learning much inclined. They went to see an elephant, but all of them were blind. It says one of them grabbed the elephant by its tail, and one of them grabbed the elephant around its big leg, and one of them grabbed the elephant by its trunk. And they went back to their village, and the villagers were also unfamiliar with an elephant. And they said, tell us about it, the elephant. Tell us about an elephant. And the one who grabbed the elephant by the tail described the elephant as being like a rope. And the one who grabbed it around its leg described it as being like the trunk of a tree. And the one who grabbed it by its trunk said it was like a snake. And they argued endlessly about what an elephant was, never realizing that the elephant was big enough to encompass all those characteristics. And they weren't describing the elephant, they were describing their relationship to the elephant. They were describing their touch point to the elephant. And see, for me, I now view it when we talk about God in Alcoholics Anonymous, when you talk about God and when I talk about God, I'm talking about my relationship, how I relate to that power. And that power is big enough for us to relate to it in a multitude of different ways. The 12 and 12 says, and it comforts me, that there may be as many different types of spiritual experiences as people who have, but all genuine ones have 3 things in common: that I can do, feel, and believe that which I could not do, feel, and believe on my unaided will and resources alone. So I'm not worried about how you describe God, and I'm not worried about how I describe God. I'm worried about what the experience of it is. When I was in that first year and uncomfortable with all this language, I went through my big book and blacked out everywhere in my big book that it said spiritual awakening or spiritual experience. And my sponsor had taken me back to Appendix 2 in our book, where there was language that was more accessible to me at the time. There was language that described a spiritual experience as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. There was language that described it as a profound alteration in my reaction to life. And I wrote that in there because I was willing to have a personality change long before I was willing to have a spiritual experience. And my sponsor, Frank, said, Steve, I don't care what you call it. I want you to have it. He said, you're hung up on language, and I want you to have an experience. So today, that's why I started this talk by saying each of us in our own language and from our own point of view talks about how he established a relationship with God. All a point of view is what it looks like from here. All I can tell you is what God looks like through my eyes, through my experience, through what I'm doing. It doesn't make yours wrong. Right now, every one of you, all of us have a different point of view. I cannot see, we're in this two-dimensional world right now, and I can't see three-dimensionally everything that you can see from where you sit, and you can't see everything I can see from where I am. It doesn't mean what you see is wrong. It just means none of us see the whole picture. And our book says no one can fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. So none of us has the whole story. What we each have is our own experience and our limited ability to express that experience in my vocabulary, which does not do justice to a spiritual experience that defies articulation. As DeMello says, it's like trying to describe the smell of a rose. How do I describe how a rose smells? Well, it smells rose-like, But really, what? And so, how do I describe this? The feeling of this relationship with God. So the way that ends today, and anybody who's ever heard me talk has heard me end with the poem that describes my relationship with you, with me, and with God today, from a wonderful man here in Nashville named Mo Hollern that passed away in 2003. And a few weeks before Mo passed away, I asked him, he always recited this poem in his talks, and it so described my experience. I asked Mo when we knew it was our last time together if it would be okay if I ended my talks with that poem, because it describes so succinctly this relationship I've been talking about, trying to describe. And he said, "Oh, Steve, if you think it'll help another drunk." And I will tell you, from October of 2003 until tonight, I've never given a version of this talk that I've not ended with that poem. And it has never not helped another drunk, because I'm always the drunk that it helps. But the poem said, "I sought my God I could not see. I sought my soul eluded me. But I sought my fellow man and found all three." And see, when I kind of move everything else away, at its core for me, Alcoholics Anonymous has been a night like tonight, where you guys invite me in. You give me the chance to share myself with you, and you pretend to listen patiently for an hour. In doing that, this power shows up in a way that I can't define or comprehend, but it's made it unnecessary for me to take a drink since June the 29th of 1989. And for much of that time, when I'm willing to accept the gift, it's afforded me a life that is happily and usefully whole. And if it's whole, nothing's missing. And tonight, I sit here believing nothing is missing. Thank you so much, Phil, for having me. Thank you guys for being patient with me.